The humid Alabama air hung thick on the evening of August 14, 1998, as Detective Sarah Chen pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Whispering Pines Motel on Highway 231. Just outside, the neon sign flickered erratically, intermittent red shadows across the asphalt. Room 17's door stood ajar, yellow crime scene tape already stretching across the threshold like a barrier between the known and the unknowable. Marcus and Diane Rodriguez had been scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury the following Monday about irregularities they'd witnessed at Coastal Construction, where Marcus, a project supervisor, and Diane handled payroll. The couple had been placed in protective custody, receiving anonymous threats, relocated to this unremarkable motel that specialized in cash payments and minimal questions. Chen's radio crackled as she approached the room. "Detective, we've got their car here, personal belongings untouched, but no sign of struggle inside the room," reported Officer Jamie Walsh, who had arrived first on scene after the motel manager called in the suspicious circumstances. The room told a story of interrupted normalcy. Diane's purse sat on the dresser, wallet containing $347 in cash. Marcus's reading glasses lay folded beside a dog-eared copy of John Grisham's The Rainmaker. The television remained tuned to the evening news. 2 suitcases, hastily packed but organized, suggested people preparing for a long journey they'd never take. Chen examined the timeline methodically. The couple had checked in at 3:47 p.m. using the alias Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, paying cash for a week's stay, as instructed by their federal handlers. The desk clerk, a nervous teenager named Billy Hutchin, remembered them clearly. They'd seemed frightened but determined. At 7:15 p.m., they'd ordered pizza from Tony's, delivered by a driver who recalled nothing unusual. The motel manager had last seen their car in the lot around 10:30 p.m. when he made his final rounds. By morning, they were gone. The federal marshal Kellerman and Deputy Lisa Santos claimed they'd been conducting from an unmarked van. Their reports indicated no unusual activity until they noticed the open door during their 6 a.m. check. The timeline left a crucial 8-hour window where anything could have happened. Chen found the first irregularity in the motel's guest room. The entry for room 17 showed the Rodriguez's arrival time, but the departure was marked as 08:15:98, 02:30 a.m. in different handwriting. When questioned, the night manager, a weathered man named Eddie Voss, claimed he didn't remember making the entry and suggested the couple might have left voluntarily. The Dothan Police Department had limited resources for what initially appeared to be a possible voluntary disappearance. Marcus and Diane had no children, few local connections, and the federal case they were involved in remained largely classified. Chief of Police Robert Brennan assigned Chen as lead detective, but made it clear that federal investigators would be taking point on. FBI Special Agent Michael Torres arrived from the Mobile field office within hours, bringing with him a team of specialists and an air of federal authority that immediately shifted the investigation's dynamic. Torres was polite but firm. The Rodriguez disappearance was now a federal matter, given their status as protected witnesses. Local police would provide support, but the FBI would control the investigation's direction. Chen sensed something wasn't right from the beginning. The crime scene felt staged, too clean for a genuine abduction. The federal marshal's surveillance contained subtle, inconsistent times that didn't align perfectly, descriptions that seemed rehearsed rather than observed. Most troubling was the lack of physical evidence in a case that should have left traces. The initial canvass of the motel revealed that 3 other rooms were occupied that night. An elderly couple from Georgia remembered hearing raised voices around midnight but couldn't determine their source. A traveling salesman reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the parking lot but couldn't provide detailed description. The third guest, a man registered under the name David Mills, had checked out early that morning, paying cash and leaving no forwarding information. As the first week passed without leads, Chen began documenting every detail of the case in meticulous, handwritten notes. She photographed the room from multiple angles, interviewed every motel employee twice, and created a detailed timeline that would become the foundation for years of investigation. Her instincts told her that Marcus and Diane Rodriguez hadn't simply disappeared. They'd been taken, and someone with inside knowledge had helped cover the track. The case officially went cold after 3 months of intensive investigation yielded no concrete lead. The federal grand jury proceedings were postponed indefinitely. The coastal construction inquiry stalled, and the Rodriguez family was left with questions that would haunt them for decades. Chen, however, never left, keeping the file on her desk and revisiting the evidence whenever new case. What Detective Chen couldn't have known on that humid August was that she was staring at the opening scene of a conspiracy that reached construction sites of southern Alabama to the highest levels of local law enforcement. The disappearance of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez wasn't random. It was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to protect millions of dollars in illegal profits and the powerful people who controlled them. The motel room in Dothan would remain empty for years, a silent monument to two people who'd tried to do the right thing and paid the ultimate price. But evidence has a way of surfacing, and truth has a way of emerging, even after 27 years of careful concealment. The VHS tape that would eventually break the case wide open was already sitting in a storage unit, waiting for the right moment to tell its story. 6 weeks after the Rodriguez disappearance, Detective Sarah Chen received the call that briefly reignited hope in what was becoming an increasingly cold case. A fisherman pulling nets from the Chattahoochee River near the Alabama-Georgia border had snagged what appeared to be human remains tangled in submerged debris. The drive to the recovery site took Chen through the heart of rural Alabama's construction. Everywhere she looked, new developments sprouted from former farmland, strip mall, subdivision entrance, and industrial complexes that seemed to materialize overnight. Coastal Construction's logo appeared on signs throughout the region, advertising their role in the area's economic transformation. The remains, however, belonged to a homeless man who'd gone missing 3 months earlier. DNA analysis ruled out any connection to the Rodriguez case, but the discovery prompted renewed media attention and a fresh wave of tips that kept Chen busy for weeks. Special Agent Torres maintained tight control over the investigation's federal aspect, sharing information selectively with local law enforcement. Chen learned to work around these restrictions, developing her own network of contacts and pursuing leads that fell outside federal jurisdiction. Her persistence paid off when she uncovered the first concrete evidence of organized criminal activity. Through careful analysis of Coastal Construction's public contracts, Chen identified a pattern of cost overrun and change orders that seemed designed to inflate project expenses. Small municipalities southeast Alabama had approved construction projects that consistently exceeded their budgets by 20–30%, with Coastal Construction receiving most of the additional payments. The pattern suggested systematic bid rigging and fraudulent billing practice. Marcus Rodriguez's role as project supervisor would have given him access to documentation proving these irregularities. Diane's position in payroll would have revealed the financial mechanisms used to hide illegal payments. Together, they possessed evidence that could have exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme affecting dozens of public projects. Chen's investigation into Coastal Construction led her to Vincent "Vinny" Marcello, the company's enigmatic owner. Marcello had arrived in Alabama in 1995 from New Orleans, bringing with him sufficient capital to rapidly expand his construction business and enough political connections to secure major contracts. His background check revealed a spotty past, several arrests for assault and racketeering in Louisiana, though no conviction. The first break in the case came through an unexpected source. Jessica Manning, a paralegal at the law firm representing Coastal Construction, contacted Chen anonymous with information about document destruction that had occurred immediately after the Rodriguez. Manning reported seeing boxes of financial records being shredded and computer hard drives being replaced throughout the firm's office. Chen met Manning at a diner in Ozark, 30 miles from Dothan, where the paralegal revealed disturbing details about her firm's involvement in covering up Coastal Construction's activities. The law firm, Manning explained, maintained 2 sets of books for several clients, legitimate records for routine transactions, and concealed documents detailing payoffs to public officials and inflated billing schemes. They moved fast, appeared, her hands trembling. Mr. Caldwell, the firm's senior partner, called an emergency meeting on August, said we had to clean house immediately. 3 paralegals worked through the weekend destroying documents. Manning provided Chen with photocopies secretly made of several financial records before their destruction. The documents revealed payments totaling $2.3 million to various Alabama officials, disguised as consulting fees and campaign contributions, but clearly intended as bribes to secure construction contracts. However, Manning's cooperation came at a personal cost. Within a week of their meeting, she was fired from the law firm for performance issues and found herself blacklisted from other legal positions in the area. She left Alabama shortly afterward, fearful for her safety, but determined to ensure her information reached the right investigators. The second significant lead emerged from an unlikely source, a VHS recording system at a truck stop 15 miles from the Whispering Pines motel. Chen discovered the recording system during a routine canvass of businesses along Highway 231, searching for surveillance that might have captured vehicles leaving the area on the night of the truck stop's owner, Clarence Dubois, initially claimed his security system hadn't been operational in August 1998. However, Chen's persistent, careful questioning revealed that Dubois maintained recordings for insurance purposes, storing them in a climate-controlled room. After obtaining a search warrant, Chen discovered dozens of VHS dating back several years. The tape from August 14 and 15, 1998, showed several vehicles passing the truck stop during the crucial overnight hours. Most were easily identified as regular traffic, but one vehicle, a dark-colored van with no visible license plate, appeared 3 times between midnight and 3 a.m., suggesting multiple trips along the highway. The video quality was too poor for detailed identification, but the timing corroborated Chen's theory that the Rodriguez abduction had been carefully planned and executed. Unfortunately, Dubois' cooperation ended abruptly when he received an anonymous phone call threatening his business and family. The truck stop owner became evasive and hostile, eventually refusing to discuss the case further. When Chen returned to collect additional tapes, she discovered that the storage room had been burglarized, with all remaining surveillance recordings stolen. These early leads established a pattern that would define the investigation for years. Evidence that confirmed criminal activity quickly disappeared, witnesses became reluctant to cooperate, and federal oversight limited local law enforcement to pursue certain avenues. Chen began to suspect that someone with significant influence was actively obstructing the investigation. The corruption extended beyond simple document destruction. Chen noticed that certain leads were never properly investigated by federal agents. Witness interviews were sometimes conducted without local police present, and crucial evidence was classified beyond her security clearance. The case file grew thick with reports, but meaningful progress remained elusive. By January 1999, 5 months after the disappearance, Chen had accumulated substantial evidence of criminal activity surrounding coastal construction, but remained no closer to finding Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The federal investigation had stalled. Special Agent Torres had been reassigned to other cases, and public interest in the missing couple had faded. Chen, however, refused to let She continued working leads during her off-duty hours, maintaining contact with Jessica Manning and other potential witnesses who'd left the area. Her dedication to the Rodriguez case put strain on her other investigations and drew criticism from Chief Brennan, who wanted the department's resources focused on active cases rather than what appeared to be an unsolvable mystery. The detective's persistence would eventually prove crucial, but not for nearly 2 decades. The evidence she meticulously gathered during 1998 and 1999 would form the foundation for breaking the case wide open, once technology and changing circumstances finally provided the tools to uncover the truth. The VHS tape from Clarence Dubois' truck stop, in particular, would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined at the time. By spring of 1999, Detective Chen had mapped an extensive network of corruption that reached far beyond coastal construction's fraudulent billing practice. Her investigation revealed a sophisticated system of kickbacks, intimidation, and document falsification that involved construction companies, law firms, and local government officials across southeast Alabama. The breakthrough came through patient analysis of public records and construction contracts spanning 5 years. Chen spent countless hours in courthouse basements and municipal office, photocopying permits, bid documents, and payment authorizations. What emerged was a clear pattern of collusion designed to funnel public money into private pockets. At the center of the conspiracy sat Vincent Marcello, whose coastal construction had grown from a small operation to the region's dominant contractor within 3 years. The company's rapid expansion coincided with an unprecedented surge in public construction projects funded by federal grants and state infrastructure programs. Marcello's success wasn't due to competitive pricing or superior work. It was the result of systematic bid rigging and bribery. Chen's analysis revealed that coastal construction consistently submitted bids exactly 2 to 5% below their nearest competitors, suggesting advanced knowledge of rival proposals. Once contracts were awarded, change orders and cost overruns routinely increased project expenses by 25–40%. The excess payments were distributed through a network of shell companies and consulting agreements that disguised the true recipient. The corruption extended to the highest levels of local government. Chen documented suspicious payments to 3 county commissioners, 2 mayors, and multiple department heads responsible for construction over. These officials received money through various channels: inflated speaking fees, consulting contracts or private businesses, and donations to political campaigns and charitable organizations they controlled. Most disturbing was evidence suggesting law enforcement involvement in the conspiracy. Chen discovered that certain construction sites experienced unusually few safety inspections and code violations, despite worker complaints about dangerous conditions. When she investigated these anomalies, she found that inspection reports had been altered or documents had disappeared from regulatory files. The corruption network's sophistication became apparent when Chen attempted to interview Donald Caldwell, the senior partner at the law firm representing construction. Caldwell agreed to meet, but arrived accompanied by 2 attorneys and a private investor who recorded the entire conversation. The lawyer provided vague, non-committal responses to Chen's questions, while his associates documented every aspect of her investigation. Within days of the Caldwell interview, Chen received a formal complaint filed with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. The complaint, submitted by an anonymous source, accused her of harassment and exceeding her authority in the Rodriguez investigation. Chief Brennan called Chen into his office to discuss the matter, expressing concern about federal agents' complaints regarding her parallel investigation. "Detective, I understand your commitment to this case," and said, reviewing the internal affairs complaint, "but we need to be careful about interfering with ongoing federal investigation. Agent Torres specifically requested that we limit our involvement to supporting their efforts." Chen suspected the complaint was designed to intimidate her and limit her investigation, but she couldn't prove it. The incident demonstrated the conspiracy's ability to reach into law enforcement and use official channels to protect their interests. From that point forward, Chen conducted much of her investigation and kept her most sensitive findings in personal files rather than official police reports. The detective's most significant discovery involved the relationship between coastal construction and First National Bank of Dothan, which had provided financing for multiple construction projects while also handling the company's complex financial arrangement. Bank records obtained through a carefully crafted subpoena revealed a pattern of unusual cash transactions and wire transfer that suggested money laundering. Marcus Rodriguez's bank statement, seized during the initial investigation, showed that he'd been conducting his own inquiry into these financial irregularities in the weeks before his disappearance. His personal checking account contained photocopies of invoices and payment authorizations that didn't match official project records. Diane's records revealed similar documentation, suggesting the couple had been systematically gathering evidence. The most damaging discovery was a series of payments from coastal construction to a company called Southern Security Solutions, which Chen traced to a group of former police officers and military personnel who provided various services to construction. These services included background checks on employees, security at construction sites, and what company literature euphemistically described as conflict resolution. Southern Security Solutions was operated by Raymond Ray Kowalski, a former New Orleans police detective who'd been dismissed from the force for excessive force violations. Kowalski had followed Marcello to Alabama and established his security company shortly after coastal construction began its expansion. The timing suggested a coordinated effort to establish operations in a new territory. Chen's investigation into Southern Security Solutions revealed disturbing connections to violence and intimidation. Several construction workers who'd complained about safety violations or pay discrepancies had been fired after visits from company representatives. Union organizers attempting to establish chapters at coastal construction sites had faced harassment and vandalism that was never properly investigated by local police. The detective discovered that Southern Security Solutions maintained detailed files on potential threats to coastal construction's operation, including government employees, journalists, and anyone who asked too many questions about the company's business practice. Marcus and Diane Rodriguez were listed in these files as high-priority security risks. Several weeks before Chen's attempts to interview Kowalski were unsuccessful. The security company owner refused to meet with police and responded to official inquiries through an attorney. When Chen attempted surveillance of Southern Security Solutions offices, she discovered that her own vehicle was being followed by unidentified individuals who broke off their surveillance whenever she changed routes or stopped unexpectedly. The harassment escalated when Chen's personal information began appearing in unusual contexts. She received calls at home from people claiming to have information about the Rodriguez case, but the callers hung up immediately when she tried to arrange meetings. Her credit cards were used for small purchases she hadn't made, and her mail occasionally contained items she hadn't ordered. Most troubling was the discovery that someone had been accessing her police department computer files using her login credentials during hours at work. The IT department initially dismissed her concerns, claiming the access records must be incorrect, but Chen eventually proved that someone had been monitoring her investigation by logging into the system from external locations. The systematic nature of the harassment suggested sophisticated surveillance capabilities and inside knowledge of police department procedures. Chen began to suspect that someone within law enforcement was providing information to the conspiracy, though she couldn't identify the source. Despite these obstacles, Chen continued building her case throughout 1999 and into 2000. She maintained contact with Jessica Manning, who provided additional information from her new location in Georgia. Chen also developed relationships with federal agents from other agencies who were investigating related cases involving public corruption in Alabama. The detective's persistence paid off when she discovered a connection between the Rodriguez case and a broader federal investigation into construction industry corruption across the Southeast. The FBI's Organized Crime Division had been monitoring Vincent Marcello and Raymond Kowalski for potential racketeering violations, though their investigation focused on activities in Louisiana and Mississippi rather than Alabama operations. By early 2000, Chen had assembled a comprehensive file documenting the conspiracy's structure and operation. However, she still lacked the crucial evidence needed to prove that Marcus and Diane Rodriguez had been murdered rather than simply intimidated into silence. That evidence would remain hidden for 2 decades, buried in a storage unit alongside other secrets that would eventually surface to expose the full scope of the conspiracy's crimes. The year 2000 brought a new federal task force to Alabama, ostensibly focused on construction industry fraud, but actually designed to monitor and control the investigation into organized crime activities. Detective Chen found herself caught between competing law enforcement agencies, each with their own agenda and level of corruption. FBI Special Agent Karen Valdez arrived in Montgomery with credentials that impressed even veteran investigators. Her background included successful prosecutions of organized crime figures in Chicago and Miami, along with specialized training in financial crimes and witness protection. Valdez's assignment to Alabama suggested federal authorities were finally taking the construction corruption seriously. Chen's initial meeting with Agent Valdez took place at the Federal Building in Montgomery, a deliberately neutral location away from local law enforcement facilities. Valdez had studied Chen's reports, expressed genuine interest in the detective's findings, though she cautioned federal investigations moved slowly and required irrefutable evidence. "What you've documented about coastal construction is impressive," as told Chen during their first meeting, "but we need more than financial irregularities to build a RICO case. We need evidence of violence, witness intimidation, and ongoing criminal enterprise. That's where your local knowledge becomes invaluable." The federal task force included agents from FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and Department of Labor investigators specializing in construction industry violation. Their resources dwarfed anything available to local police departments, including sophisticated surveillance equipment, financial analysis software, and the authority to conduct operations across state lines. Chen was assigned as the task force's local liaison, a position that provided access to federal resources while maintaining her connection to the Rodriguez case. The arrangement seemed ideal until Chen discovered that not all task force members shared Agent Valdez's commitment to uncovering the truth. IRS agent Michael Forrester, a 20-year veteran of financial crimes investigation, seemed more interested in protecting certain individuals than prosecuting them. During task force meetings, Forrester consistently argued against surveillance operations that might expose high-level corruption, claiming insufficient resources or legal complications. His reluctance to pursue certain leads became a pattern that Chen documented carefully. The task force's first operation focused on Southern Security Solutions, using court-authorized surveillance to monitor Raymond Kowalski's activities. Chen and Agent Valdez established observation posts near the company's offices and followed Kowalski's vehicles as he traveled between construction sites and meetings with unknown associates. The surveillance revealed that Southern Security Solutions operated more like intelligence than a conventional security company. Kowalski's employees conducted background investigation, monitored potential threats, and maintained files on hundreds of individuals throughout southeast Alabama. Their activities included photographing people's homes, recording license, and gathering personal information through pretexts and illegal databases. Most disturbing was evidence that Southern Security Solutions had access to law enforcement databases and confidential government information. During one surveillance session, Chen observed a Southern Security employee using a police department computer terminal, apparently with official permission. The employee's access allowed him to run license plate checks, review arrest records, and examine case files that should have been restricted. Chen reported this breach of security to Internal Affairs, but her complaint was dismissed after the police department's investigation concluded that the Southern Security employee had been conducting authorized research for an unnamed federal agency. The explanation was clearly fabricated, but Chen lacked the authority to pursue the matter further. Agent Valdez shared Chen's suspicions about law enforcement corruption and began conducting her own investigation into compromised personnel. Using federal resources, she analyzed communication records, financial transactions, and travel patterns of various officials who might have been providing information to the conspiracy. The investigation into police corruption yielded shocking. Valdez discovered that several law enforcement officers received unexplained payments through consulting contracts, speaking fees, and private security work. The payments were carefully structured to avoid detection. They created a pattern of financial relationships between police personnel and the criminal organization. Most damaging was evidence that Chief Robert Brennan had accepted money from Coastal Construction through a consulting agreement with his private security company. Brennan's company had been paid $75,000 over 2 years for services that were never clearly defined, and the payments coincided with periods when the Rodriguez investigation had been scaled back or redirected. Chen felt betrayed by her superior's corruption, but she also recognized the danger it posed to her own safety. If Brennan was providing information to conspiracy, then her investigation and personal safety were compromised. She began taking precautions, varying her routes to and from work, and keeping her most sensitive findings in locations outside the police department. The task force's surveillance of Vincent Marcello required more sophisticated techniques Due to his awareness of law enforcement attention, agents used long-range photography, electronic surveillance, and financial transaction monitoring to track his activity. The investigation revealed that Marcello maintained residences in Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, traveling frequently between locations and conducting business through intermediaries. Marcello's organization operated through a network of legitimate and shell construction contracts were awarded to his entity, but money fee benefit. The sophistication of these arrangements suggested involvement of experienced financial professionals and possibly organized crime expertise from outside Alabama. Agent Valdez's most significant discovery involved a storage facility in Mobile, where Coastal Construction maintained files and equipment. Using court-authorized surveillance, the task force observed vehicles arriving at the facility during unusual hours and personnel removing boxes and equipment that were never documented in company records. The storage facility became a focus of the investigation when Chen connected it to similar facilities used by Southern Security Solutions. Cross-referencing rental agreements and utility records revealed a pattern of interconnected storage spaces rented under various names, but all connected to the same individuals and organization. Obtaining search warrants for the storage facilities proved challenging due to legal complications and jurisdictional issues. Agent Forrester consistently argued against aggressive investigation tactics, claiming they would compromise ongoing operation. His obstructionism became so apparent that Agent Valdez began conducting certain aspects of the investigation without his knowledge. The breakthrough came when Jessica Manning, the former paralegal who'd fled Alabama after providing information to Chen, contacted Agent Valdez with additional evidence. Manning had retained copies of financial records that documented payments to specific law enforcement officers, including dates, amounts, the services rendered in exchange for the money. Manning's evidence provided the foundation for understanding how the conspiracy had protected itself from investigation. Corrupt officials had provided advance warning of planned operations, shared confidential information about witnesses and evidence, and used their authority to obstruct legitimate investigation. The corruption extended to prosecutors, judges, and federal agents who had allowed the criminal organization to operate with impunity. However, Manning's decision to come forward again put her life in danger. Within days of contacting Agent Valdez, Manning reported suspicious activity near her Georgia residence and threatening phone calls from unidentified callers. The task force arranged for protective measures, but the incident demonstrated the organization's ability to track and threaten potential witnesses across state lines. By late 2000, the federal task force had accumulated substantial evidence of criminal activity, but they still lacked proof connecting the organization to the Rodriguez disappearance. The missing couple remained the key to building a comprehensive case, but their fate remained unknown despite nearly 2 years of investigation. Agent Valdez and Detective Chen continued working together, sharing information and coordinating their efforts despite the obstacles created by corrupted personnel within their respective agencies. Their partnership would prove crucial in the years ahead as new evidence emerged and the investigation evolved into a complex cat-and-mouse game with one of the South's most dangerous criminal organizations. The underground phase of the investigation had revealed the conspiracy's structure and methods, but it had also exposed the investigators to serious personal danger. The organization's willingness to use violence and intimidation against anyone who threatened their interests was becoming increasingly apparent, setting the stage for even more dangerous confrontations in the years ahead. Between 2001 and 2005, the Rodriguez investigation endured a series of false breakthroughs that raised hopes, only to deliver crushing disappointment. Each promising lead ultimately revealed the criminal organization's sophisticated ability to manipulate information and mislead investigators, while the missing couple's fate remained as mysterious as ever. The first major false lead emerged in March 2001 when construction workers excavating a foundation for a shopping center in Enterprise discovered human remains. The bones appeared to be from 2 individuals buried together, and initial forensic analysis suggested they had been interred for approximately 2 to 3 years. Detective Chen and Agent Valdez rushed to the scene, hoping they'd finally found Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The excavation site became a carefully controlled archaeological dig as forensic experts worked to recover every piece of evidence. The remains were found wrapped in plastic sheeting and buried approximately 8 feet deep, suggesting deliberate concealment rather than accidental disposal. Personal effects recovered from the burial site included fragments of clothing and a woman's wedding ring that seemed consistent with descriptions of Diane Rodriguez's jewelry. However, DNA analysis conducted at the State Crime Laboratory revealed that the remains belonged to 2 other missing persons, a couple from Georgia who disappeared in 1999 while traveling through Alabama. The discovery led to arrests in an unrelated murder case, but it left Chen and Valdez no closer to finding the Rodriguez couple. The disappointment was compounded by evidence that someone had deliberately planted false clues at the burial site to suggest a connection to the Rodriguez case. The wedding ring, which had initially seemed like a breakthrough, was determined to be a replica of Diane Rodriguez's actual ring, created with enough accuracy to fool initial examination, but lacking the specific engravings that made the original unique. Agent Valdez realized they were dealing with an organization sophisticated enough to create false evidence designed to waste investigative resources and demoralize the investigators. The planted evidence suggested the criminal organization was monitoring the investigation closely and actively working to mislead law enforcement. The second major false lead involved a witness who claimed to have information about the Rodriguez disappearance. In September 2002, a man calling himself David Thompson contacted the FBI tip line with specific details about the night of August 14, 1998. Thompson claimed to have been present when Marcus and Diane Rodriguez were abducted from the Whispering Pines motel. Thompson's story was compelling and detailed. He claimed to be a former associate of Vincent Martello who'd participated in the abduction, but had since experienced a crisis of conscience. According to Thompson, the Rodriguez couple had been taken to a remote location in rural Alabama where they were interrogated about the evidence they'd gathered on Coastal Construction's illegal activities. The witness provided specific details about the abduction that hadn't been released to the public, including descriptions of the motel room's interior and the couple's personal belongings. He claimed the operation involved 6 individuals, including Raymond Kowalski and 2 corrupt police officers, whose names he promised to reveal in exchange for witness protection. Agent Valdez and Detective Chen spent weeks verifying Thompson's claims and preparing for what seemed like the case's biggest breakthrough. The FBI arranged for witness protection and began preparing charging documents based on Thompson's expected testimony. The witness was scheduled to provide a formal statement in October 2002. Thompson never appeared for his scheduled interview. When agents went to his hotel room, they found it empty except for planted evidence suggesting he'd been abducted by the same organization he was preparing to expose. Security camera footage from the hotel showed Thompson leaving voluntarily with an unidentified woman, contradicting the staged abduction scene in his room. Subsequent investigation revealed that David Thompson was actually a professional con artist named Robert Cleary, who'd been hired by unknown parties to waste law enforcement resources and gather intelligence about the investigation's progress. Cleary's detailed knowledge of the case came from inside sources within the criminal organization, not from personal participation in the Rodriguez abduction. The elaborate deception had consumed months of investigative time and resources while providing the criminal organization with detailed information about law enforcement tactics and priorities. Agent Valdez began to suspect that corrupt personnel within the task force were providing information to the organization, allowing them to stay one step ahead of the investigation. The third significant false lead emerged in 2003 when a convicted felon named Danny Morrison claimed to have buried the Rodriguez couple's remains in exchange for a reduced sentence on drug trafficking charges. Morrison provided detailed maps, descriptions of a burial site in the Conacook National Forest, claiming he'd been hired by Coastal Construction to dispose of the bodies. Morrison's story included specific details about how the couple had been killed and dismembered before burial. He claimed to have been paid $10,000 for his services and provided investigators with serial numbers from the cash he'd supposedly received. The story was disturbing, but seemed credible enough to warrant investigation. A massive search operation involving dozens of law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and search dogs was organized to excavate the suspected burial site. The search lasted 3 weeks and involved sophisticated ground-penetrating radar and archaeological techniques. Media attention was intense, with daily updates on the progress of the dig. The search yielded nothing except evidence that the site had been deliberately prepared to appear as though it had once contained human remains. Soil analysis revealed traces of animal blood and bone fragments that had been planted to trigger positive reactions by search dogs and forensic equipment. Morrison's story was completely fabricated, designed to waste resources and generate false publicity. Investigation into Morrison's background revealed that his legal fees had been paid by a shell company connected to the criminal organization. His cooperation with law enforcement was part of an elaborate scheme to discredit the investigation and exhaust the ongoing search. These falsely devastate on investigative morale and confidence. Media coverage became increasingly skeptical, with journalists questioning whether the Rodriguez couple had actually been murdered or had simply disappeared voluntarily to avoid testifying. The false leads created enough doubt to undermine legitimate witnesses and evidence. Detective Chen found herself defending the investigation's credibility while struggling with her own doubts about whether justice would ever be achieved. The criminal organization's ability to manipulate the investigation suggested resources and connections that extended far beyond what she'd initially suspected. Agent Valdez faced pressure from federal supervisors to redirect resources toward more promising. The Rodriguez investigation consumed significant time and money while producing no arrests or concrete. By 2004, the task force was officially disbanded, though Valdez continued working the case as part of her regular caseload. The years of false leads had one unintended consequence. They taught investigators valuable lessons about the organization's methods and capability. Chen and Valdez developed techniques for verifying information and identifying potential deception that would prove crucial when genuine evidence finally emerged. Despite the setbacks, both investigators maintained detailed files documenting every lead, false or genuine, that had been pursued during the investigation. These files would eventually become crucial when new evidence emerged and the case was reopened. The false leads had also revealed the criminal organization's sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities and their determination to prevent the truth about the Rodriguez disappearance from being discovered. The investigation entered a dormant phase after 2005, with both Chen and Valdez occasionally reviewing the files but lacking new leads to pursue. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved, joining the ranks of mysteries that haunt law enforcement professionals throughout their careers. Neither investigator could have imagined that the breakthrough they'd been seeking for 7 years was sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit, waiting for the right circumstances to bring it to light. In 2006, a new opportunity emerged to penetrate the criminal organization when Agent Valdez learned that Southern Security Solutions was recruiting former military personnel for specialized security contracts. The FBI developed an elaborate undercover operation designed to place an agent inside the organization's inner circle. Special Agent Michael "Mike" Torres, in relation to the earlier agent, was selected for the undercover assignment based on his military background and experience with organized crime investigation. Torres had served 3 tours in Iraq as a military intelligence officer before joining the FBI, giving him credible credentials for infiltrating a security company that valued combat experience. The undercover operation required extensive preparation and backstopping. Torres adopted the identity of Mike Torino, a former Army Ranger discharged for disciplinary problems who was seeking employment in private security. FBI technicians created a complete background history, including military records, employment history, and personal references that would withstand investigation by suspicious criminals. Torres's infiltration began in February 2006 when he applied for a position with Southern Security Solutions using credentials that suggested experience in military intelligence and a willingness to work outside legal boundaries. Raymond Kowalski personally interviewed prospective employees using techniques designed to identify law enforcement officers and assess loyalty to the organization. The interview process was more sophisticated than Torres had anticipated. Kowalski used psychological pressure tactics, background verification that extended to childhood associates, and practical tests that required Torres to demonstrate his willingness to engage in illegal activities. The vetting process took 3 months and included surveillance of Torres's personal life to ensure he was who he claimed to be. Torres's military background and carefully crafted personality enabled him to pass the screening process, but joining Southern Security Solutions was only the beginning of a dangerous assignment that would last 3. The organization's security culture was based on paranoia and mutual surveillance, with employees constantly monitoring each other for signs of disloyalty or law enforcement connection. Initial assignments were mundane security work at constructions and office, designed to test new employees' reliability and discretion. Torres's military discipline and professional competence impressed supervisors, leading to gradually increased responsibilities and access to more sensitive operation. The first insight into the organization's criminal activities came 6 months into Torres's assignment when he was selected for a special project involving witness intimidation. A former coastal construction employee named Robert Hayes had been subpoenaed to testify in a civil lawsuit about construction defects, and Southern Security Solutions was tasked with discouraging his cooperation. Torres was assigned to work with Tommy Guidra, a veteran employee who specialized in what the company euphemistically called conflict resolution. Guidro's methods involved surveillance, harassment, and escalating threats designed to make witnesses reconsider their willingness to testify against company interests. The Hayes intimidation campaign provided Torres with his first direct evidence of criminal activity. Over several weeks, he and Guidroz conducted surveillance of Hayes's residence and workplace, photographed his family members, and gathered personal information about his financial situation and personal relationships. The intelligence was used to craft threats specifically designed to exploit Hayes's vulnerability. Torres documented the intimidation campaign using hidden recording equipment, capturing conversations that proved Southern Security Solutions was systematically obstructing justice. The evidence was compelling, but Torres's undercover role prevented immediate action. Agent Valdez and the FBI team had to watch Hayes endure weeks of harassment while waiting for Torres to gather evidence about more serious crimes. Hayes eventually withdrew his cooperation with the civil lawsuit, claiming he'd been mistaken about what he'd observed at construction sites. His withdrawal was celebrated within Southern Security Solutions as a successful, and Torres's participation in the intimidation campaign enhanced his reputation within the organization. The success of the Hayes operation led to Torres's promotion to a more specialized role within Southern Security Solutions. He was assigned to work directly with Vincent Martello on security matters requiring discretion and expertise. This position provided access to the highest levels of the criminal organization and insight into operations spanning multiple states. Torres's new responsibilities included conducting background investigations on potential threats, coordinating security for high-level meetings, and managing what Marcello called special projects. These assignments provided Torres with evidence of racketeering, money laundering, and violent crimes that extended far beyond the original construction fraud investigation. The most significant breakthrough came in early 2008 when Torres was assigned to conduct security sweeps of storage facilities used by the organization to hide evidence and valuable assets. During one of these sweeps, facility in Mobile, Torres discovered boxes of documents related to various criminal activities, including files that referenced the Rodriguez case. Among the stored documents, Torres found what appeared to be surveillance photos of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez taken in the weeks before their disappearance. The photos showed the couple at their home, workplace, and other locations, suggesting the organization had been monitoring them extensively before taking. More disturbing was a file containing detailed plans for the Rodriguez abduction, including floor plans of the Whispering Pines motel, photographs of the room they would occupy, and timing schedules that matched the actual events of August 14, 1998. The documents proved the disappearance had been carefully planned rather than spontaneous. Torres also discovered financial records documenting payments to various individuals for services related to the Rodriguez case. The payments included $50,000 to cleanup services, $25,000 for transportation, and $10,000 for disposal. The clinical terminology couldn't disguise the implication that Marcus and Diane Rodriguez had been murdered and their bodies disposed of. Most shocking was evidence that corrupt law enforcement payments for their assistance in covering up the Rodriguez murders. The documents listed specific amounts paid to police officers, sheriff's deputies, and federal agents for services, including evidence tampering, report falsification, and information sharing. Torres photographed the documents using concealed camera equipment, but he couldn't remove them without compromising his cover. The evidence was too important to risk losing, so Torres developed a plan to create opportunities for law enforcement to legally access the storage facility through independent investigation. Working through Agent Valdez, Torres provided tips that led to surveillance of the storage facility and eventually to court-authorized searches. However, by the time search warrants were executed, the most incriminating documents had been removed. The organization's counterintelligence capabilities had detected law enforcement and triggered emergency procedures to relocate sensitive materials. Despite this setback, Torres had gathered enough evidence to prove the criminal organization's involvement in the Rodriguez murder. The challenge was building a case that could be prosecuted without revealing Torres's undercover role, which remained crucial for gathering additional evidence about ongoing criminal activity. Torres's position within the organization continued to provide access to valuable intelligence, but it also exposed him to increasing dangers. The organization became more suspicious of potential law enforcement infiltration. Several employees had been subjected to polygraph examinations and enhanced background investigations as leaders sought to identify security breach. The undercover operation reached a crisis point in late 2008 when Raymond Kowalski announced that all employees would undergo comprehensive security reviews conducted by outside specialists. The reviews would include financial analysis, lifestyle examination, and contact with former associates, exactly the kind of scrutiny that could expose Torres's true identity. Agent Valdez and Torres faced a critical decision: extract him immediately and lose access to ongoing criminal activity, or maintain his cover and risk exposure that could result in his murder. The decision was complicated by evidence Torres had gathered about planned violent crimes that could be prevented only through continued access to the organization's plans. The undercover operation had achieved its primary objective by proving the criminal organization's involvement in the Rodriguez murders, but it had also revealed a conspiracy much larger and more dangerous than initially suspected. The evidence Torres gathered would eventually prove crucial, but first he had to survive the increasingly paranoid environment within Southern Security Solutions as the organization sought to identify and eliminate threats to its continued. By 2010, digital forensics had opened new possibilities for investigation. Detective Chen, now a sergeant in the Dothan Police Department, convinced her superiors to authorize a comprehensive review of the Rodriguez case using modern investigative techniques. The breakthrough began with a decision to digitize all physical evidence from the original investigation. This process, funded by a federal grant for cold case investigations, involved high-resolution photography, 3D scanning, and spectral analysis of items that had been stored for 12 years. The new documentation techniques revealed details that hadn't been visible during the original investigation. The most significant discovery came from re-examining the VHS from Clarence Dubois' truck stop, which had been stored in the police evidence room since 1999. Advances in video enhancement technology allowed forensic specialists to extract much clearer images from the grainy surveillance footage. Enhanced analysis of the truck stop video revealed partial license plate numbers and vehicle identification details that hadn't been visible in 1998. The dark-colored van that had passed the truck stop 3 times during the crucial overnight hours was identified as a 1995 Chevrolet Express. An enhancement of reflective surfaces captured partial views of the occupant. Digital facial recognition technology, though still primitive by later standards, provided enough detail to suggest that one of the van's occupants resembled Raymond Kowalski. The match wasn't definitive enough for courtroom presentation, provided investigators with their first concrete evidence linking Southern Security Solution to the Rodriguez disappearance. Agent Valdez, still working the case despite official reassignment to other investigations, coordinated the technology-enhanced review with Chen's renewed local investigation. The partnership had evolved over 12 years from professional cooperation to personal friendship, with both investigators sharing a determination to achieve justice for Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The video enhancement also revealed a second vehicle following the van during its third pass at the truck stop. This vehicle, previously invisible in the original recordings, appeared to be a late-model sedan with temporary license. Frame-by-frame analysis captured enough detail to identify the vehicle as belonging to a rental car company, providing a new avenue for investigation. Rental car records from August 1998 had been destroyed according to normal business practice, but the enhanced video provided enough information to identify the specific vehicle model and approximate rental period. Cross-referencing this information with credit card records and travel documentation led investigators to a rental agreement signed by Thomas Mitchell, a known associate of Vincent Marcello. Mitchell's involvement in events surrounding the Rodriguez disappearance provided the first direct evidence linking Marcello's organization to the crime. However, Mitchell had died in a car accident in 2003, eliminating him as a potential witness while raising suspicions about the circumstances of his death. The second major breakthrough involved reanalysis of physical evidence collected from the Whispering Pines. Advances in DNA extraction techniques allowed forensic specialists to recover genetic material from items that had tested negative. In 1990, hair follicles and skin cells found on the room's doorframe yielded DNA profiles that didn't match Marcus or Diane Rodriguez. The unknown DNA profiles were entered into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, which had expanded significantly since the original investigation. One profile matched a convicted felon named Anthony Batiste, who had been arrested in Louisiana in 2004 for armed robbery and assault. Batiste's criminal history included associations with organized crime figures and previous employment with security companies. Batista's DNA evidence placed him at the Rodriguez abduction scene, but locating him for questioning proved challenging. He had been released from prison in Louisiana in 2007 and had subsequently disappeared, apparently violating parole and avoiding law enforcement contact. The search for Batiste became a priority for both Chen and Valdez, as he represented their best hope for an eyewitness to the Rodriguez murders. The investigation into Batiste's background revealed connections to both Vincent Marcello and Raymond Kowalski, dating back to their New Orleans operation. Batiste had worked for several companies owned or controlled by Marcello, including security firms and construction companies that operated throughout the Gulf Coast region. Cell phone records, which had been primitive in 1998 but were now subject to sophisticated analysis, revealed communication patterns that supported the investigators' theories about the Rodriguez abduction. Vincent Marcello's phone had been in contact with numbers associated with the Whispering Pines motel area during the critical time period, suggesting he was coordinating the operation from a remote location. The most valuable technological advancement was the ability to analyze financial transactions electronically. Banking records that had required weeks of manual review in 1998 could now be processed and cross-referenced by computer systems that identified suspicious patterns and connections between accounts. This financial analysis revealed that payments totaling $125,000 had been made from accounts controlled by Coastal Construction to various individuals in the weeks following the Rodriguez disappearance. The payments were disguised as legitimate business expenses, but their timing and recipients suggested they were compensation for services related to the abduction and murder. One of the recipients was Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a pathologist who had performed autopsies on several suspicious deaths in the region. Her involvement suggested the organization had access to medical professionals who could falsify death certificates or dispose of bodies without leaving traces that would trigger investigation. The enhanced investigation also benefited from improved interagency cooperation and information sharing. Databases that had been separate in 1998 were now integrated, allowing investigators to cross-reference criminal records, financial transactions, and travel patterns across multiple jurisdictions. Agent Torres, still operating undercover within Southern Security Solutions, was able to provide real-time intelligence about the organization's response to the renewed. His reports indicated increasing paranoia within the organization as leaders realized that advancing technology was making their past crimes more vulnerable to detection. The combination of enhanced evidence and new investigative techniques created momentum that had been lacking for over a decade. Chen and Valdez began developing prosecution strategies based on the accumulated evidence, working with federal prosecutors who were finally convinced that a successful case could be built. However, the renewed investigation also increased the danger for everyone involved. The criminal organization had demonstrated its willingness to use violence to protect its interests, and the advancing investigation represented an existential threat to leaders who had enjoyed impunity for over a decade. Agent Torres reported that Vincent Marcello had hired additional security personnel and was conducting counter-surveillance operations designed to identify law enforcement activities. The organization was also liquidating assets and creating contingency plans for relocating operations or eliminating witnesses who posed threats. The technological breakthroughs had provided investigators with their best evidence yet, had also triggered a race against time. The criminal organization was adapting to the changed environment and preparing to protect itself through any means necessary. The next phase of the investigation would determine whether justice could finally be achieved or whether the organization's resources and ruthlessness would allow it to escape accountability once again. The enhanced evidence had answered many questions about Rodriguez murders, but it had also revealed the true scope of the conspiracy and the danger faced by anyone who threatened its continued existence. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine whether 12 years of patient investigation would result in justice or whether the case would remain forever unsolved. By 2012, the convergence of enhanced evidence, technological advances, and Agent Torres's undercover intelligence created unprecedented pressure on the criminal organization. Vincent Marcello and his associates found themselves facing the most serious threat to their operation since establishing their presence in Alabama 14 years earlier. The pressure manifested in several ways. First, the organization's financial networks were being systematically dismantled as investigators traced money laundering operations and identified shell companies used to hide illegal profit. Federal agencies had frozen over $3 million in assets and were pursuing civil forfeiture actions that threatened the organization's ability to fund its operations. Second, key personnel within the organization were becoming unreliable as law enforcement increased. Several longtime associates had been arrested on unrelated charges and were facing pressure to cooperate with federal investigators. The organization's culture of paranoia and mutual surveillance was creating internal tensions that threatened operational effectiveness. Third, legitimate businesses that had provided cover for criminal activities were withdrawing their cooperation as the risks of association became apparent. Construction companies, banks, and professional service firms that had participated in the conspiracy were distancing themselves and destroying records that might implicate them in ongoing investigation. Agent Torres, now in his 6th year undercover, reported that Vincent Marcello was becoming increasingly erratic and dangerous. The organization's leader was demanding enhanced security measures, conducting loyalty tests on longtime associates, and making threatening statements about eliminating potential witnesses. Torres's position provided a window into the organization's desperation, but it also placed him in grave personal. The investigation reached a critical juncture when DNA evidence linked Anthony Batiste not only to the Rodriguez crime scene, but also to 2 other unsolved murders in the region. The additional murders, both of potential witnesses against coastal construction, established a pattern of violence that strengthened the case for racketeering charges under federal RICO statute. Detective Chen, working with federal prosecutors, developed a comprehensive prosecution strategy that would use the Rodriguez murders as the cornerstone of a broader case against the entire criminal organization. The strategy required precise timing to prevent the organization from eliminating evidence or witnesses before arrests could be made. The most dangerous aspect of the investigation was the need to protect Agent Torres while gathering final evidence necessary for prosecution. Torres had reported that Raymond Kowalski was planning to conduct comprehensive background investigations of all Southern Security Solutions employees, using methods that would almost certainly expose Torres's true identity. Agent Valdez developed an extraction that would remove Torres from danger while creating a cover story that wouldn't compromise. The plan required Torres to stage an apparent breakdown and resignation from Southern Security Solutions, citing stress and personal problems that would explain his departure without raising suspicions about law enforcement infiltration. However, events moved faster than anticipated when Torres discovered that Vincent Marcello was planning to eliminate several potential witnesses, including some who were not yet known to law enforcement. Torres learned of the planned murders during a meeting where Marcello discussed cleaning house to prepare for what he expected would be increased law enforcement attention. The intelligence about planned murders created an urgent need to accelerate the investigation timeline. Potential victims had to be warned and protected, but doing so risked exposing the source of the information and compromising Torres's safety. The situation required careful coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies and precise time to prevent murders while protecting the undercover operation. Agent Valdez made the difficult decision to maintain Torres's cover while implementing enhanced protection for identified targets. Potential victims were placed under surveillance, with law enforcement prepared to intervene at the first sign of threat. The strategy was risky, but it offered the best chance of preventing murders while preserving the undercover operation that had become crucial to building the prosecution case. The plan worked for several weeks, with law enforcement successfully preventing 2 assassination attempts while maintaining the appearance that the failures were due to enhanced target security rather than inside information. However, the organization's leadership began to suspect intelligence leaks and implemented additional security measures that made Torres's situation increasingly precarious. The breaking point came in March 2012 when Raymond Kowalski announced that all Southern Security Solutions employees would undergo polygraph examinations conducted by specialists experienced in detecting law enforcement officers. The examinations were scheduled to begin with senior employees, making Torres one of the first to be tested. Polygraph examination would almost certainly expose Torres's true identity, forcing Agent Valdez to implement emergency extraction procedures. Torres's removal from the organization would end the intelligence that had become invaluable for understanding the criminal organization plan's capability. The extraction required creating a plausible explanation for Torres's sudden departure that wouldn't immediately alert the organization to law enforcement infiltration. Torres staged a violent confrontation with another employee, allowing him to be fired for cause in a way that appeared consistent with his carefully cultivated, unstable personality. Torres's extraction was successful, but it marked the end of 6 years of undercover work that had provided unprecedented insight into the criminal organization's structure and operation. His intelligence had been crucial for building the prosecution, but his departure meant that law enforcement would lose the ability to monitor the organization's increasing pressure. Without inside intelligence, investigators had to rely on traditional surveillance and investigation techniques to monitor the organization's activities. This transition proved challenging as Vincent Marcello implemented enhanced counter-surveillance measures and restricted access to sensitive information within his organization. The loss of inside intelligence came at a critical time as investigators prepared to make arrests and execute search warrants that would effectively end the criminal organization's operation. The timing had to be precise to prevent evidence destruction and witness elimination while ensuring that sufficient evidence was available for successful. Federal prosecutors, working with Agent Valdez and Detective Chen, developed a coordinated plan to arrest key figures simultaneously while executing searches of multiple locations known to contain evidence. The operation would require extensive resources and careful coordination to prevent the organization from responding with violence or evidence destruction. The investigation had reached the point where further delays would only benefit the criminal organization. Vincent Marcello and his associates were aware of the increasing law enforcement pressure and were taking steps to protect themselves through intimidation, evidence destruction, and contingency planning for escape or retaliation. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine whether 14 years of criminal activity would result in justice for Marcus and Diane Rodriguez and dozens of other victims. The criminal organization's resources and ruthlessness would be matched against the accumulated evidence and determination of investigators who had spent over a decade building their case. The success or failure of the upcoming operation would determine not only the fate of the individual criminals, but also the effectiveness of law enforcement's ability to combat sophisticated organized crime operations that had adapted to modern investigative techniques while maintaining their willingness to use violence and corruption to protect their interests. The operation to capture Vincent Marcello and dismantle his criminal organization required 6 months of planning and coordination between multiple law enforcement agents. By September 2012, investigators had identified 17 targets for arrest and 15 locations were simultaneous. The complexity of the operation rivaled major terrorism. Agent Valdez served as the operations coordinator, working with FBI, SWAT, local police departments, and federal marshals to ensure simultaneous execution across 3 states. The timing had to be precise. Any delay could allow the organization to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses, while premature action might compromise ongoing investigations in other jurisdictions. Detective Chen, now a lieutenant in the Dothan Police Department, led the local component of the operation. Her 14 years of work on the Rodriguez case had made her the subject matter expert on the organization's Alabama operation. Chen's detailed knowledge of locations, personnel, and evidence would be crucial for the operation's success. The investigation had identified Vincent Marcello's primary residence as a compound outside Mobile, Alabama, protected by sophisticated security systems and armed personnel. Surveillance indicated that Marcello rarely left the compound and conducted most business through intermediaries, making his capture extremely challenging. Agent Torres, still recovering from his years undercover, provided crucial intelligence about the compound's layout, security measures, and daily routines. His information revealed that Marcello typically met with associates on Thursday evening, providing the best opportunity for capturing multiple targets simultaneously. The operation began at 5:47 a.m. on Thursday, September 27, 2012, with coordinated raids across Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. FBI SWAT teams approached Marcello's compound, while state and local officers executed warrants at Southern Security Solutions Office storage facilities and the residences of key associates. Marcello's compound proved more heavily fortified than anticipated. The property included motion sensors, surveillance cameras, and armed security personnel who were prepared to resist law enforcement. The initial approach triggered an alert system that gave Marcello's security team several minutes to prepare for the assault. The confrontation lasted nearly 4 hours as federal agents worked to breach the compound's defenses without risking civilian casualties. Marcello's security team was heavily armed but ultimately outnumbered and outgunned by the federal response. 3 security personnel were wounded during the standoff, but no law enforcement officers were seriously injured. Vincent Marcello surrendered at 9:23 a.m. after negotiators convinced him that resistance was futile. The crime boss emerged from his fortified residence accompanied by his attorney, who had apparently been summoned during the standoff to negotiate surrender terms. Marcello's calm demeanor suggested he had prepared for this eventuality. The arrest of Raymond Kowalski proved more dramatic. Southern Security Solutions office had been evacuated except for Kowalski, who barricaded himself in a conference room with weapons and communications. Negotiations lasted 2 hours before tear gas forced him to surrender. Kowalski's capture was particularly significant because he possessed detailed knowledge of the organization's violent crimes, including the Rodriguez murders. His arrest marked the first time investigators had custody of someone who could provide direct testimony about what had happened to Marcus and Diane Rodriguez on August 14, 1998. The simultaneous searches yielded massive amounts of evidence. Storage facilities contained boxes of financial records documenting money laundering operations, bribes to public officials, and payments for violent crimes. Computer systems held encrypted files with detailed records of criminal activities spanning 15 years. Most significantly, investigators discovered a climate-controlled storage room containing video recordings of various crimes, including surveillance footage and what appeared to be recordings of interrogation murders. The discovery of video evidence was unexpected and represented a potential breakthrough in proving the organization's serious crimes. Among the seized video recordings was a VHS tape labeled Rodriguez 8-1498 that contained footage from the night. The tape's existence confirmed that the organization had documented their crimes, possibly for blackmail or as insurance against. The video evidence could not be viewed immediately due to legal requirements for chain of custody and forensic analysis. However, its existence provided investigators with what they hoped would be definitive proof of the Rodriguez murders and the circumstances surrounding their death. The arrests and searches effectively dismantled the criminal organization's operational capacity. Key personnel were in custody, financial assets were frozen, and legitimate businesses that had provided cover for criminal activities were cooperating with investigators to avoid prosecution. However, the investigation revealed that the organization's corruption had extended deeper into law enforcement and government than previously suspected. Among the seized documents were records of payments to federal agents, state prosecutors, and local officials who had protected the organization's interests for years. The revelation of extensive corruption complicated the prosecution strategy because some of the officials who would normally handle the case had been compromised. Special prosecutors had to be appointed, and additional investigations were launched to determine the full scope of official misconduct. Chief Robert Brennan of the Dothan Police Department was arrested 3 days after the main operation when evidence revealed that he had received over $200,000 in payments from the criminal organization. Brennan's arrest was particularly painful for Detective Chen, who had worked under his command for years without suspecting his involvement in the conspiracy. The corruption investigation expanded to include IRS agent Michael Forrester, who had obstructed the federal task forces for years. Forrester's financial records revealed payments from shell companies controlled by Vincent Marcello, explaining his consistent effort to limit the investigation's scope and effectiveness. By October 2012, 37 individuals had been arrested in connection with the criminal organization, including politicians, law enforcement officers, and business professionals who had facilitated the conspiracy. The scope of the arrests demonstrated how deeply the organization had penetrated legitimate institutions. The success of the operation represented the culmination of 14 years of investigation, but it also marked the beginning of complex legal proceedings that would determine whether the accumulated evidence could result in convictions. The organization's sophisticated legal defense strategies and the complications created by official corruption would test the prosecution's case. Most importantly, the arrests provided the first real hope for families of victims who had waited years for answers. Marcus and Diane Rodriguez relatives had maintained their belief that the couple had been murdered, and the arrests seemed to validate their long-held suspicions about official indifference to the case. The VHS tape labeled Rodriguez 8-1498 represented the potential key to finally understanding what had happened to the missing couple. However, viewing the tape would require careful legal procedures to ensure that its contents could be used as evidence in the prosecution of those responsible for their deaths. The capture operation had succeeded beyond investigators' expectations, but the most challenging phase of the case was just beginning. Converting arrests into convictions would require presenting complex evidence to juries, overcoming sophisticated legal defenses, and navigating the complications created by years of corruption and cover-up. 3 weeks after his arrest, Raymond Kowalski found himself facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment without parole. The evidence against him was overwhelming, DNA placing him at crime scene, financial records documenting payments for violent crimes, and testimony from Agent Torres about his role in witness intimidation and murder conspiracy. Kowalski's attorney, a prominent criminal defense lawyer from New Orleans, had reviewed the prosecution's evidence and advised his client that cooperation with federal investigators represented his only hope for avoiding a death sentence. The government was prepared to seek capital punishment for multiple murders, including the Rodriguez killing. On October 18, 2012, Raymond Kowalski agreed to provide full cooperation in exchange for a plea agreement that would spare him the death penalty. The negotiation process took several days as prosecutors insisted that Kowalski's cooperation must be complete, truthful, and verifiable through other evidence. Agent Valdez and Detective Chen were present when Kowalski began his formal confession on October 22, 2012. The session was recorded and transcribed, creating a permanent record of the first detailed account of what had happened to Marcus and Diane Rodriguez on the night of August. Kowalski's confession began with background of conspiracy that had motivated the Rodriguez murders. According to Kowalski, Vincent Marcello's organization had been systematically frauding public construction projects since arriving in Alabama in 1995. The scheme involved bid rigging, cost overruns, and kickbacks that had generated over $15 million in illegal profit. Marcus Rodriguez had discovered the fraud scheme through his work as a project for coastal construction. His position gave him access to financial record project documentation that revealed the systematic overcharging and substandard work that characterized the conspiracy. Diane's role in payroll had provided additional evidence of irregular payments and false documentation. The couple's decision to cooperate with federal investigators had triggered panic within Marcello's organization. The evidence Marcus and Diane possessed could have exposed the entire conspiracy and resulted in lengthy prison sentences for everyone involved. Eliminating them had been viewed as necessary for the organization's survival. Kowalski's confession revealed that the Rodriguez abduction planned for over 2 weeks. The organization had conducted surveillance of the couple's daily routines, identified their placement in protective custody, and developed detailed plans for reaching them at the Whispering Pines motel. The operation had required inside information about federal witness protection procedures, which was provided by corrupt law enforcement personnel who were being paid by the organization. The federal marshals assigned to protect the Rodriguez couple, Deputy John Kellerman and Deputy Lisa Santos, had been compromised and actively participated in the abduction. According to Kowalski's confession, the abduction operation began at approximately 11:30 p.m. on August 14, 1998. A 6-person team had approached the motel using 2 vehicles, the van that had been captured on surveillance footage and a sedan driven by corrupt federal marshals who provided legitimate law enforcement credentials if questioned. The team had entered the Rodriguez couple's motel room using a master key provided by the compromised federal marshals. Marcus and Diane Rodriguez were awakened and told they were being moved to a more secure location due to threats against their safety. The deception had prevented them from resisting or attempting to escape. The couple was transported to a warehouse facility owned by one of Marcello's shell companies, located in a remote area outside Dothan. The facility had been prepared in advance with soundproofing and equipment necessary for what Kowalski euphemistically described as enhanced interrogation. Kowalski's confession became more disturbing as he described the treatment of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez during their final hours. The couple had been interrogated about the evidence they possessed, the names of other potential witnesses, and the extent of federal knowledge about the conspiracy. Vincent Marcello had personally conducted the interrogation, assisted by Kowalski and 2 other associates. The crime boss had been particularly concerned about computer files and documents that might have been hidden or provided to other parties. The interrogation had lasted approximately 6 hours, during which both victims had been tortured to ensure complete cooperation. The confession revealed that Marcus Rodriguez had been forced to provide passwords for computer accounts and the location of hidden. Diane Rodriguez had been coerced into calling her bank and transferring funds to accounts controlled by the organization, creating false evidence that the couple had fled voluntarily. According to Kowalski, Both victims had begged for their lives and offered complete cooperation in exchange for mercy. Marcus had provided detailed information about other coastal construction employees who possessed incriminating evidence, while Diane had revealed the location of backup computer files stored at their home. The murders had occurred at approximately 7:00 a.m. on August 15, 1998. Kowalski confessed that he had personally killed both victims using a .22 caliber pistol, which was preferred because it was quieter and less likely to attract attention. The bodies had been dismembered to facilitate disposal. The disposal of the remains had been handled by Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the pathologist who had been receiving payments from the organization. Hartwell had access to a crematorium through her medical practice and had disposed of the bodies without creating records that would indicate their processing. The confession included details about the cover-up operation that had followed the murders. The motel room had been sanitized to remove evidence of the abduction, and false documentation had been created to suggest the couple had checked out voluntarily. The corrupt federal marshals had filed reports claiming they had lost contact with their subjects due to communication equipment failures. Most disturbing was Kowalski's revelation that the entire sequence of events had been recorded on video equipment that Vincent Marcello had insisted on using to document the interrogation. The recording had been intended as insurance against potential betrayal by participants in the murder, but it had been preserved as evidence of the organization's capabilities. The VHS tape that investigators had discovered during their search was indeed a recording of the Rodriguez interrogation and murder. Kowalski's confession provided authentication for the video evidence and detailed descriptions of what the recording would show when forensic analysis was completed. The confession also revealed the extent of official corruption that had enabled the murders and subsequent cover-up. In addition to the corrupt federal marshals, the organization had paid local police officers, sheriff's deputies, and prosecutors to obstruct investigation and provide false information about the case. Kowalski identified Chief Robert Brennan as a key figure in the cover-up, revealing that Brennan had provided information about Detective Chen's investigation and had actively discouraged pursuit of leads that might have exposed the truth. The corruption had extended to federal agents who had misdirected the investigation and suppressed evidence. The confession session lasted 2 days as prosecutors worked to verify details and obtain complete information about all aspects of the conspiracy. Kowalski's cooperation provided the foundation for understanding 15 years of criminal activity and the systematic corruption that had protected the organization from justice. By the end of the confession, investigators had a complete picture of one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in Alabama history. The Rodriguez murders were revealed as just one element of a larger pattern of violence and corruption that had affected dozens of victims and corrupted numerous public officials. The confession provided closure for the Rodriguez family, who had waited 14 years for answers about their loved one's fate. However, it also revealed the horrific details of their deaths and the systematic failure of law enforcement systems that should have protected them. Most importantly, Kowalski's confession provided the evidence necessary to prosecute Vincent Marcello and his remaining associate for capital murder charges. The detailed testimony, supported by physical evidence and the VHS recording, created a compelling case that would be difficult for defense attorneys to challenge. The VHS tape, labeled Rodriguez 8/14/98, sat in a climate-controlled evidence room for 3 months, while forensic specialists and legal experts determined how to properly analyze and authenticate its contents. The tape represented potentially the most important piece of evidence in the case, but viewing it required careful procedures to ensure its admissibility in court. Federal prosecutors obtained a court order authorizing forensic analysis of the recording, with strict protocols to preserve the original tape while creating authenticated copies for investigation and trial use. The analysis was conducted at the FBI's Video Forensics Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, using equipment capable of enhancing and stabilizing decades-old video recordings. Agent Valdez and Detective Chen were among the first investigators authorized to view the recording's content. The viewing session took place on January 15, 2013, in a secure facility with court reporters present to document the investigators' observations and reactions to what they witnessed. The video recording was even more disturbing than Kowalski's confession had suggested. The tape contained over 7 hours of footage showing the interrogation, torture, and murder of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The recording quality was sufficient to clearly identify the participants and document their actions in graphic detail. The video began with footage of the Rodriguez couple being brought into the warehouse facility where they would spend their final hours. Both victims appeared confused and frightened, but not yet aware that they were in mortal danger. They had clearly believed their captors' claims about relocating them for security purposes. Vincent Marcello appeared prominently in the recording, personally directing the interrogation and making statements that demonstrated his leadership of the criminal organization. His calm, business-like demeanor while ordering torture and murder provided chilling evidence of his character and the organization's systematic to eliminating. The recording documented the systematic torture of both victims as their captors sought information about evidence, witnesses, and federal investigation procedures. The interrogation techniques included physical violence, psychomanipulation, and threats against family members designed to ensure complete cooperation. Most valuable from an evidentiary standpoint was Marcus Rodriguez's detailed confession about the evidence he had gathered documenting Coastal Construction's criminal activities. The recording captured him providing specific information about hidden documents, computer files, and other employees who possessed incriminating evidence. Diane Rodriguez's portion of the interrogation focused on financial records and money laundering operations she had discovered through her payroll responsibilities. The recording showed her being forced to access bank accounts and transfer funds while providing detailed information about the organization's financial crimes. The video evidence clearly established premeditation and deliberation for the murders, crucial elements for capital punishment cases. Vincent Marcello was recorded discussing the necessity of killing both victims and making detailed plans for disposing of their bodies. His statements demonstrated that the murders were not impulsive acts but carefully considered decisions. Raymond Kowalski appeared throughout the recording as an active participant in torture and murder. The video corroborated his confession while providing visual evidence compelling. His role in the actual killings was clearly documented, supporting the prosecution's case for capital punishment. The recording also captured appearances by several other individuals, including the corrupt federal marshals who had facilitated the abduction. Deputy John Kellerman and Deputy Lisa Santos were shown participating in the interrogation and helping to plan the cover-up operation that would follow the murders. Technical analysis of the video revealed additional evidence beyond the obvious criminal acts. Timestamps and audio analysis confirmed the timeline of events described in Kowalski's confession. Background conversations captured additional incriminating statements and revealed the names of other conspiracy participants. The video's audio track contained telephone conversations between Vincent Marcello and associates who were coordinating various aspects of the operation. These conversations provided evidence of the conspiracy's scope and the systematic nature of their criminal activity. Most disturbing were the final minutes of the recording, which showed the actual murders of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The footage was graphic and traumatic, requiring specialized handling to prepare it for presentation to juries. Expert testimony would be necessary to explain the evidence while minimizing the impact on court personnel and jurors. The video evidence also documented the beginning of the cover-up operation, including instructions for cleaning the warehouse facility and disposing of evidence. Vincent Marcello was recorded giving detailed instructions for creating false documentation and coordinating with corrupt officials to misdirect the subsequent investigation. Analysis of the recording equipment and storage conditions confirmed that the video was authentic and had not been altered. The VHS tape's deterioration was consistent with its age, and technical examination revealed no evidence of editing or manipulation. The recording would withstand challenges to its authenticity in court proceedings. The discovery of video evidence had implications beyond the Rodriguez case. The recording contained references to other murders and criminal activities that had not been previously investigated. Federal prosecutors began developing additional cases based on evidence contained in the 7-hour recording. For the Rodriguez family, viewing portions of the video evidence provided the closure they had sought for 14 years, but it also confronted them with the horrific details of their loved ones' final hours. Family members worked with victim advocates to prepare for the emotional challenges of trial proceedings. The video evidence created a powerful foundation for the prosecution's case, but it also presented challenges for court proceedings. The graphic nature of the recording would require careful handling to avoid prejudicing juries while ensuring that the evidence's full impact was presented to support capital punishment. Defense attorneys immediately challenged the video's admissibility, claiming it was prejudicial, and arguing that portions should be excluded from trial proceedings. The legal battles over evidence admissibility would continue for months as both sides prepared for what promised to be one of Alabama's most significant criminal trials. The VHS recording represented the culmination of 15 years of investigation and technological advancement. The same video enhancement techniques that had revealed crucial details in the truck stop surveillance footage now provided the tools necessary to present clear, compelling evidence of the Rodriguez murders. Most significantly, the video evidence eliminated any possibility that the Rodriguez disappearance had been voluntary or that their deaths accidental. The recording provided irrefutable proof of premeditated murder and extensive conspiracy supporting the most serious charges that prosecutors file. The VHS tape that Vincent Marcello had ordered, created as insurance against betrayal, had instead become the instrument of his downfall. Recording that was intended to ensure loyalty within his criminal organization would ultimately provide the evidence necessary to destroy it and achieve justice for its victim. The video evidence and Raymond Kowalski's confession provided federal prosecutors with the foundation for one of Alabama's most comprehensive. By March 2013, grand juries in 3 federal districts had returned indictments against 47 individuals connected to Vincent Marcello's criminal organization. The charges ranged from racketeering and money laundering to capital murder and official. Vincent Marcello 17 separate charges, including 2 counts of capital murder for the Rodriguez kill. The potential penalties included death sentences for the most serious crimes. Federal prosecutors, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Manning, no relation to the former paralegal Jessica Manning, developed a prosecution strategy that would use the Rodriguez murders as the centerpiece of a broader case, demonstrating the organization's pattern of violence and corruption. The decision to seek capital punishment for Vincent Marcello, Raymond Kowalski, and 3 other key figures was controversial but necessary to reflect the severity of their crimes. The systematic nature of the murders and the extensive planning involved met federal standards for the death penalty. Agent Valdez and Detective Chen, now Lieutenant Chen, were assigned as primary law enforcement liaisons for the prosecution team. Their 15 years of investigation had made them the most knowledgeable experts on the criminal organization's structure and activities. The trial preparation process revealed the full scope of the conspiracy's impact on Alabama's political and legal system. Evidence documentation filled an entire floor of the federal building in Montgomery, with investigators working around the clock to organize materials for multiple simultaneous prosecutions. The first trial began on September 15, 2014, with Vincent Marcello facing capital murder charges for the Rodriguez killing. The prosecution's opening statement, delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Manning, outlined 15 years of criminal activity that had culminated in the systematic torture and murder of 2 witnesses. The trial attracted national media attention as one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in the modern South. Court proceedings were broadcast live, allowing the public to witness the presentation of evidence that had been gathered through one of the longest investigations in Alabama. Raymond Kowalski's testimony was the prosecution's most powerful evidence. Over 3 days, he described in detail the events of August 14 to 15, 1998, providing first-hand testimony about the Rodriguez abduction, torture, and murder. His cooperation agreement required complete truthful, verified polygraph examination and corroboration with other evidence. The VHS recording was presented in carefully edited segments that conveyed the essential evidence while minimizing the traumatic impact on jurors. Expert witnesses explained the technical aspects of the video, while victim advocates helped court personnel cope with the disturbing content. Vincent Martello's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney David Kellerman, no relation to the corrupt federal marshal, argued that the video evidence was too prejudicial for fair trial proceedings. They also challenged Kowalski's credibility, claiming his testimony was motivated by the desire to avoid the death penalty. However, the defense's arguments were undermined by the overwhelming corroborating evidence that supported Kowalski's testimony. DNA evidence, financial records, and surveillance footage all confirmed the details of his confession. The video recording eliminated any doubt about the accuracy of his account. The prosecution presented 127 witnesses over 6 weeks of trial. Testimony included evidence from forensic experts, financial analysts, former organization members, and family members of various victims. The comprehensive case demonstrated the organization's systematic approach to criminal activity. Agent Torres testified about his 6 years undercover within Southern Security Solutions, providing insight into the organization's structure and methods. His testimony was particularly powerful because it demonstrated how the organization had continued its criminal activities long after the Rodriguez murders. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the pathologist who had disposed of the Rodriguez remains, had negotiated her own cooperation agreement in exchange for testimony against Vincent Marcello. Her testimony provided crucial details about the body disposal process and confirmed Kowalski's account of the murder's aftermath. The trial's most emotional moment came when family members of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez provided victim impact testimony. Their 15-year struggle to find answers and achieve justice moved several jurors to tears and provided human context for the extensive evidence presented by prosecutors. Vincent Marcello's decision not to testify in his own defense was interpreted by legal observers as recognition that the evidence against him was insurmountable. His attorneys focused their efforts on avoiding the death penalty rather than arguing for innocence. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Vincent Marcello. The capital murder convictions carried automatic consideration for the death penalty, while the racketeering charges ensured life imprisonment even if death sentences were not imposed. The penalty phase of the trial lasted 2 weeks as prosecutors presented evidence of Marcello's criminal history and the impact of his crimes on victims and their families. The defense presented mitigation evidence about Marcello's background and personal circumstances, hoping to persuade jurors to impose life sentences rather than death. On November 7, 2014, the jury recommended death sentences for both Rodriguez murders, along with life imprisonment for the racketeering charges. The formal sentencing was scheduled for December 15, 2014, pending completion of pre-sentence investigations and legal procedures. Raymond Kowalski's sentencing, conducted separately, cooperation agreement, resulted in 2 life sentences without possibility of parole. His testimony had been crucial for convicting Marcello and other organization members, earning him consideration spared him from the death penalty. The trials of other organization members continued through 2015 and 2016, with most defendants pleading guilty to avoid lengthy prison sentences. The cooperative testimony provided by early defendants created a cascade effect that made defending the remaining cases increasingly difficult. Deputy John Kellerman and Deputy Lisa Santos, the corrupt federal marshals, were convicted of civil rights violations and conspiracy charges. Their betrayal of their oath to protect witnesses resulted in 25-year prison sentence and the loss of all federal benefits. Chief Robert Brennan, whose corruption had undermined the local investigation for years, was convicted of bribery and obstruction of justice charges. His 15-year sentence reflected the serious breach of public trust represented by his crimes. By December 16, 39 of the 47 individuals indicted in connection with the criminal organization had been convicted and sentenced. The remaining 8 defendants had fled the jurisdiction and were subjects of ongoing fugitive investigation. The successful prosecution of Vincent Marcello's organization marked the end of one of Alabama's most significant criminal enterprises. The systematic approach to justice, built on 15 years of patient investigation, had achieved convictions that would have been impossible without the dedication of Agent Valdez, Lieutenant Chen, and their colleague. The Rodriguez family finally achieved the justice they had sought since August 1998. While nothing could restore their loved one, the convictions provided closure and demonstrated that patient investigation could overcome even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. The case also led to significant reforms in witness protection procedures, law enforcement oversight, and corruption prevention measures. The systematic failures revealed by the investigation prompted changes designed to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Vincent Marcello was executed by lethal injection on March 15, 2018, nearly 20 years after ordering the murders of Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. His final statement expressed no remorse for his crimes, maintaining the defiant attitude that had characterized his criminal career. The execution marked the end of one of the most significant organized crime figures in modern Alabama history. Lieutenant Sarah Chen attended the execution as the representative of all the investigators who had worked the Rodriguez case over 2 decades. For her, watching Marcello's death provided a sense of completion for the most challenging case of her career. The investigation had consumed 15 years of professional life and had shaped her approach to law enforcement. Agent Karen Valdez, now a supervisory special agent in the FBI's Organized Crime Division, had moved on to other investigations but remained connected to the Rodriguez case through ongoing efforts to locate assets and identify additional victims. The Marcello organization's criminal activity had extended far beyond what was revealed during the trials. The successful prosecution had broader implications for law enforcement's approach to organized crime investigations. The case demonstrated the importance of patient methodical combined with advanced technology and interagency cooperation. The techniques developed during the Rodriguez investigation became models for similar cases in the country. Agent Torres, who had spent 6 years undercover within the criminal organization, struggled with psychological effects of extended assignment. The FBI provided counseling and support, but Torres eventually left the Bureau to work in private security. His sacrifice had been crucial for building the case. The personal cost was significant. The Rodriguez family established a memorial fund to support other families dealing with missing persons. Their 15-year struggle to find answers and achieve justice had given them unique insight into the challenges faced by other victims' families. The fund provided resources for private investigators, legal assistance, and emotional support. Recovery efforts continued for several years after the trials as investigators worked to locate other victims and assets connected to the criminal organization. The VHS evidence had revealed references to additional murders that were never fully investigated. Some of these cases remained open, with investigators hoping that additional evidence would eventually surface. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, served 3 years in federal prison for her role in disposing of the Rodriguez remains. Her medical license was revoked, and she was permanently barred from practicing pathology. Her cooperation had been essential for understanding how the organization had hidden evidence of their crimes. The storage facility where the VHS evidence was discovered yielded additional evidence that led to prosecution in other jurisdictions. The Marcello organization had maintained detailed records of their criminal activities, apparently for blackmail or as insurance against betrayal. These records helped solve cold cases dating back over a decade. Clarence Dubois, the truck stop owner whose surveillance system had captured crucial evidence, was never prosecuted despite his initial obstruction of the investigation. Investigators determined that his failure to cooperate had been motivated by fear rather than criminal intent. The threats he received demonstrated the organization's reach and willingness to intimidate witnesses. Jessica Manning, the former paralegal whose early cooperation had provided crucial evidence, was relocated through the Witness Protection Program after receiving death threats. Her courage in coming forward had been essential for understanding the organization's structure, but it had come at the cost of her previous life and career. The corruption investigation continued for several years after the main trials, resulting in additional prosecutions and reforms in law enforcement agencies. The systematic nature of the corruption had required comprehensive reforms to prevent similar compromises of official integrity. Chief Robert Brennan's conviction led to a complete reorganization of the Dothan Police Department under federal oversight. The department implemented new policies for corruption prevention, investigation procedures, and community accountability. Lieutenant Chen played a key role in developing these reforms. The case had broader implications for construction industry regulation and oversight in Alabama. New laws were enacted requiring enhanced transparency in public contracting, stronger conflict of interest provisions, and improved monitoring of cost overruns and change orders. The Whispering Pines Motel, where the Rodriguez couple had spent their final hours of freedom, was demolished in 2015. The site was converted to a memorial park honoring victims of violent crime, with a specific memorial to Marcus and Diane Rodriguez. The park served as a reminder of the importance of witness protection and the consequences of official corruption. The advanced forensic techniques developed for analyzing the VHS were adopted by law enforcement agencies across the country. The case demonstrated how older evidence could be re-examined using modern technology to solve cold cases that had seemed hopeless. On August 14, 2023, exactly 25 years after the Rodriguez disappearance, Lieutenant Chen, now Chief Chen of the Dothan Police Department, held a press conference to announce the final resolution of several related cold cases. The investigation that had begun with 2 missing witnesses had ultimately solved 17 murders and resulted in 47 convictions. Chief Chen reflected on the case's lessons during the anniversary press conference. The Rodriguez investigation taught us that justice delayed is not justice denied, if investigators are willing to pursue the truth regardless of obstacles or time. Technology advances, witnesses eventually come forward, and evidence has a way of surfacing when you never stop looking. The case files for the Rodriguez investigation filled an entire room at the Dothan Police Department, serving as a resource for training investigators and a reminder of the importance of thorough documentation. The meticulous records kept by Chen and Valdez had been crucial for building the prosecution. Agent Valdez, now retired from the FBI, co-authored a book about the investigation with Chief Chen. Blood and Concrete, The Rodriguez Murders and the Fall of an Alabama Crime Empire became a bestseller and was adapted into a documentary film. The proceeds were donated to organizations supporting victims' families and law enforcement training. The documentary film, which premiered in 2024, featured interviews with investigators, prosecutors, and family members involved in the case. The film's impact led to renewed interest in cold cases and additional funding for law enforcement agents to apply modern techniques to unsolved crime. The Rodriguez case ultimately became a landmark prosecution that demonstrated law enforcement's ability to overcome sophisticated criminal organizations through patience, dedications, and technological advancement. The 26 years from disappearance to final resolution represented one of the longest successful investigations in Alabama history. For the Rodriguez family, the conclusion of the legal proceedings provided closure, but it could never restore what was lost on that August night in 1998. Their loved ones had died because they chose to do the right thing, and their sacrifice had ultimately led to justice for dozens of other victims and the dismantling of a criminal organization that had terrorized communities across the Southeast. The case serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice sometimes requires decades of patience, that corruption can be overcome through dedicated investigation, and that advances in technology can breathe new life into cold cases that seemed hopeless. The VHS tape that Vincent Marcello ordered, created to ensure loyalty within his organization, had instead become the instrument of justice, preserved for 27 years until the right moment arrived to tell its terrible story and finally bring peace to those who had waited so long for answers.